Leonard Euler used physics calculations to hypothesize a hollow Earth with a central sun. His calculations suggested that gravity would propel matter equally in all directions, forming spheres and hollow cavities in the interior. Edmund Halley, who Halley's Comet is named after because he could predict the orbit of a comet with its exact return date, he could predict tide currents. He's the one that formed hollow Earth theory and said that our Earth is layered more like an onion, which is what all the articles are saying now, that they found, subterranean oceans and mountains in a layer in our Earth. He said that auroras were actually from the escaping gas from the center of our Earth coming from the North and the South Pole. Now, it just so happens that the Buddhist Tibetan monks, a bunch of ancient cultures, messengers, occultists will tell us the same thing, that the center of our Earth is sun, and that the main entrance is at the North and the South Pole. In the 1700s, John Sims, famous American Army officer and lecturer, told us that the Earth is composed of 4 concentric shells, and that there's openings at the North and South Pole, and that the interior of the Earth is inhabitable. Alexandre Saint-Viève, he coined Agartha. He's a French occultist, but there's been tons of other occultists and mediums that have been telling us of the same depictions, some even by similar names, all the way since the 1800th century on. In India, brought us the Mahabharata, thousands of years ago, they told us of these flying vehicles that ran on Mercury. Turns out they do. They told us of Shambhala, Agartha, exactly by another name, all the details. They fled the destruction, what it looks like. There's cultures all over. And in India and Shambhala, they even tell us some of the caves that it exits out of, including Ellora, Elephanta, and Jagadla caverns. It was a cave that Jesus' body was placed into to be resurrected from the mouth of many abductees and whistleblowers of the government. These extraterrestrial entities, they do soul transfers from one body to another, exact bodies. And the Cave of Patriarchs. This is said to be where Adam and Eve were casted out into the world, which makes a lot more sense if you think about it. The eternal life, especially the Lilith scenario, that makes sense now. And this place is completely guarded. There's chambers and blockages. One room was marked off with a square stone that was marked differently than anybody else. There's been a few chambers and rooms that have been discovered, but they won't let anyone go any further, and there's 2 entrances. One is completely blocked off by a stone with a dome on top of it, and the other just a big stone rolled over it. In Mayan mythology, they tell of a place called Xibalba, the exact depiction as everybody else, this ancient advanced civilization that disappeared before our pre-recorded history, godlike people that live in this underground system. Scientists just announced that they found a body of water 4 times our ocean in a layer in the Earth 400 miles in. This just shows we know nothing about the composition of our inner Earth. And when we were trying to drill to the center of the Earth, 8 miles in, we got stopped by hitting rock. Caves, rock. And the center of the Earth is 8,000 miles in. 8 miles, 8,000 miles. Now, let's look at the possibility of what kind of rock this could be.
Caves are often thought to be rare phenomena, but they actually are not. We actually live in a very hole-filled planet, and caves are made out of many different materials, not just carbonates, but there are caves.
Granite and quartzite, granite and quartz, not ice and salt, obviously. These are the same elements as our stone circles that supercharge these ley lines and portals, same elements they put in the Russian pyramids that form the circle around it. So inner Earth is supercharged. Edmund Halley, in the 1600s and 1700s, he was a geophysicist, astronomer, and mathematician. He was not only the first to predict the elliptical orbit of a comet correctly, he did it 24 times. He predicted one would return to Earth in 53 years, and it did. It's Halley's Comet, named after him. They also had Halley's map, because he could accurately predict wind currents, which is nearly impossible. And he worked with Newton. Newton was the one that proposed that Earth couldn't be solid to him. But he became convinced when he realized magnetic north and true north, same with magnetic south, and true south do not align. Magnetic declination. So he proposed that hollow Earth theory, that the Earth must consist of 3 hollow concentric shells that are held in place by gravity and spin on the axis. And okay, so one other thing, in a lot of these mythology and stories, it says that they exit out of the mouth of volcanoes. That's why we see so many UFOs hovering around these volcanoes, coming out of them when they erupt. I've already told some of you guys about the subterranean ocean, 420 miles deep into our Earth's crust. Now we're estimating this to be 6 times our ocean, based on their visualization of it just being one body of water in this entire layer. Now they've done seismic scanning, it's like giving the Earth an ultrasound, and found mountain ranges in this same layer, some bigger than Mount Everest. So before they're telling us that, oh, the water on this Earth came from out in the solar system, that it was a meteor impact, comet impact, the same excuse they give us for everything they don't have an answer for or they don't want to answer. This shows us that the water was already here. Just like every amazing and complex sea creature inside of it, from our Earth's surface, every plant, like a mycelium that the plants communicate through, insanely complex plants, just like our bodies are the most complex, and now we find out we have billions of tiny motors running in them. I think we need to stop looking to the, Big Bang, life coming from nothing, and the solar system to explain what's going on here, and start looking below our feet. Now, tons of ancient cultures tell us about the inside of our Earth, from the Tibetan Buddhist monks that protect Shambhala, and not only has the American government went looking for it. I told you about Nicholas and Helena Roerich that they funded to go look for it. Also, I found out the German government. Now, about every Native American tribe has told us about being taken inside the earth this last pole shift. The Hopi is a really good one to reference because they specifically let us know about the reptilians and the ant people that they inhabited the inside of the earth. It was the ant people that came and got them and brought them in. The Nazis went on 2 expeditions in 1938 to find the Atlanteans. One was in Antarctica, which they believed to be Atlantis, which it was. It just shifted from a warmer region, the last pole shift. And their expedition to Lhasa, Tibet, was equally and now this makes sense. I've already told some of you guys about the Dropa stones and the 716 extraterrestrial bodies, 3'6" to 4'2" feet tall. And look at this, 12,000 years ago. Now we know what happened. It was the pole shift, global flood. That's why there's no damage to the body. Found in the tunnel from Lhasa to Shambhala that so many people have tried to enter before. The Buddhist monks and the government protect it tight. I mean, 10 years earlier, the American and the Russian government had Nicholas and Helena Roerich trying to get through it. Now all of a sudden, Chinese researchers looking for ore deposits stumble on these extraterrestrial bodies. It made no sense because the German government was there and they had a lot of money and power, and they definitely paid their way in. In 1923, the United States government funded Nicholas and Helena Roerich's expedition to the Himalayas, which is directly on top of Shambhala. They went on a publicized mission looking for this giant tunnel that went from Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, to Xibalba, the capital of a subterranean empire called Agartha. And there was an entity called Master Murray, who in Theosophy is one of the many ancient masters of wisdom, who talks to these occultists, giving them these messages. He told them to go on this mission to Agartha. It's possible that he was speaking through Elena, just because she was female and she could receive him, but he probably chose them because Nicholas said that he was the reincarnation of the 5th Dalai Lama. And I kind of believe him. Some of these notes, it seemed like the other monks knew him psychically. One incident, he was at a temple and a monk led him to the back. There's this big hole with all these stones covering it, and he's like, okay, you found it, that's the entrance to Agartha, it's absolutely forbidden and you're not going in. Walked him away. So that was a 12-month trip. There wasn't a whole lot known. The last 5 months they spent incarcerated, and even despite that, the American government sent them back, funded them to go back again. So another note, their last note, was seeing a big oval vehicle in the sky. They, UFOs, they weren't even known back then, especially not that they were oval, it's 1923. And then they disappeared despite being monitored by the American, the British, and the Soviet intelligence. I'll follow up on my video last weekend about this giant tunnel that went from Lhasa to Shambhala through the Himalayan mountains directly over Shambhala. It was found in 1938 by Chinese researchers. Found this tunnel inside the mountains, went deep inside of it, and found 716 little graves of 4 feet men that had abnormally large heads, abnormally large eyes. There was also the Dropa stones found with them, these circular discs that had cobalt on them that is usually only found in meteors, and they're said to be from Sirius. which is strange because the black psychic stone that was given to Nicholas Roerich was said to be from Orion, even had engravings saying it's from Orion, so I imagine these had engravings saying it's from Sirius, and it was said to be from a meteor. And so there was planets, sun, earth, moon, all that, and hieroglyphs. And then the hieroglyphs, so they said that they were prime numbers, but then a real analysis came, and somebody wasn't supposed to give it, and said that it said something, well, this is how they analyzed it. It said something about a crash landing, which they were stuck here, which sounds like the Sumerian tablets, but misinterpreted. They said they're stuck here from an alien war, but I can understand how they would think, like, oh, alien war, their spacecraft landed and they got stuck here. So a lot of parallels. For those of you who don't know G.E. Kincaid, 1902, he discovered an entire inner Earth system inside the Grand Canyon. I mean, hieroglyphed walls, a big Buddha statue. Well, I mean, it wasn't Buddha, it had lotus flowers in his hands, but very similar, you know, Asian. And like an entire crypt, what they call a crypt, I think it's a human sacrifice room, all kinds of stuff. And there was an article published in the Arizona Gazette about the findings, and it mentions that Smithsonian is involved, and then all of a sudden, like now, they're denying it ever happened, but G. Kincaid took notes and photos and all that. If you want to research it yourself, go beyond Google. It's all government media filtered.
Mentioned that these solar sneezes occur on a cyclic basis, and happened back into antiquity, and we have information that a army whistleblower is being prepared to come forward to bring a lot of very interesting information about what they've been doing in the Grand Canyon. Well, if you study the U.S. Army's activity in the Grand Canyon, they took over that area, you know, a couple hundred years ago, and took a lot of it away from the natives, of course. What they found is a cavern system that goes deep down into the earth, just giant cracks, basically, that go deep down into the earth that you can navigate fairly easily. And they open up into larger caverns. And in those larger caverns, they found big adobe villages. It was very obvious that a population had survived there for a long term. And they found a lot of other interesting things, including giants with elongated skulls. That's information that I'm told that this U.S. Army whistleblower is going to be bringing out very soon.
And that became the net. And then others, of course, went down and hid into the Grand Canyon for some length of time until things settled down before they returned to the pueblos that they had originally occupied. And I think even our people as recent as the 1800s still refer to these people that went and hid out in the canyons and that to get away from the Anasaza. They called them Gahiaja families and that, Pueblo groups and that were recognized by that name. And even Manuelito, one of our war chiefs, referred to the Hopi people as Gahiaja, Gaspaha, because they're one of the ones that were recognized as they went and hid in the Grand Canyon. Things that were so horrible that when the holy people finally destroyed them, they caused the rocks to cave in, and they caused the big winds to dry up all of the wells. And even some of the ruins and that, they have reconstructed so many of them. Even Mesa Verde, it was just a pile of rocks at one time. It's all been reconstructed to some point, and it is that's what people go to see, and they think that those are just the way that they were left, and that's not so. And so it is that you have to ask questions. You have to ask important questions, and it is that you must get answers.
Due to the possibility of rockfall, Spruce Tree House is closed. 2 years after the park's establishment in 1908, the site was excavated and stabilized by Jesse Walter Fuchs of the Smithsonian Institution. The stabilization efforts by Fuchs included blasting a trench in the rock above the dwelling in order to reroute the flow of ground surface water, which keeps it from cascading over the rim onto the dwelling below. This blasting, however, may have disrupted a natural occurring arch in the cliff face, causing it to settle an additional few inches. The arch is part of a 270-foot-long crack that parallels the rim above the site. His team cleaned, covered, and waterproofed the crack, although it appears that these waterproofing methods were ineffective. Until a full geotechnical assessment is conducted and work is done to reduce this threat, Spruce Tree House will remain closed.
So the Hopi, they say that the first people exited out of the mouth of the Grand Canyon. and prayed to the Temple of the Sun, kind of like Temple of the Sun in Egypt. They also said that the serpent people exited out of the mouth of the Grand Canyon and turned into human beings. Remember, they took giant form, and the article said of cyclopean proportions. So also, now, if you go there now, like bird's eye view, people have taken helicopters, whatever, you can see it's completely like blocked off. They put these big metal plates over it, and you can see like the little like tools that, you know, men set up so they could work on there. And if you go exploring down there, a black helicopter will chase you. And this forbidden zone, all these rock formations have names that are either Hindu or Egyptian gods and goddesses. Like there's Temple of Isis, Horus, Ra, Temple of Set, and then same with like Krishna, Buddha, all that stuff, Shiva. So, not suspicious at all. Smithsonian denies it ever happened. There's an ancient underground network of tunnels underneath the Four Corners that connect a lot of these indigenous tribes. And I told you about the Anasazi, that's the Four Corners. They built Chaco Canyon. And the Zuni tribe, they say that there's 4 worlds of inner earth, which completely aligns with what the Mayans say, that also tell of these serpent people that inhabit inner earth. It just all aligns too perfectly. Now, all of the tribes there, the Zuni, the Hopi, the Apache, and the Apache actually are specific about the cataclysm that, you know, they called it the land of fire, and after the land of fire, there's a cataclysm, and they were brought into the inner earth tunnel. They admit to destroying these ancient tunnels and what they call mines sometimes because it's just too much red tape. Why would they call them mines? The Anunnaki, remember, they are on Earth. We're on Earth to mine their gold. And this aligns with a lot of these ancient stories as well. I mean, you know, like the Incas, ancient gold in the tunnels of Cusco, or the conquistadors, you know, the invaders, invading the Americas, Asia, Africa, all of these ancient tribes would just have stacks of gold. And like, no, you can't take it. It belongs to the gods. This was like in the 1400s. It's recorded history. Doc Noss, 1937. He discovered a cave. There was like some shoddy weather. He discovered one of these caves under the Four Corners of America. And he just started exploring, went really far deep into it, and there was just bars of gold, like stacks of bars of gold. And the story goes is that he blew up the tunnel trying to open the mouth and sealed it off and didn't get the gold, which is obvious BS in my opinion. Obviously, they let him take the gold, and I was like, oh, you know what though? People are going to steal this. Why don't we just say that you blew it up and you never got the gold, but their agenda was to seal the cave, obviously, so nobody else could go exploring any deeper. The Mohuxai is an Amazon tribe native to Ghana, Brazil, and Venezuela. They are the guardians of the underworld for the children of the sun, and they say they are the descendants of the children of the sun. There they are again, children of the sun. And they describe the children of the sun as giants, about 12 to 15 feet, and they live deep inside the earth. And the Mohuxai, they're guardians of these entrances. And when they go down, it takes them weeks to get down that far to meet them. They start passing volcanic rock, they start getting weightless, and they're just starting getting like elevated to where they can go further and further, and they reach a point where things start to float. They said that there's greenery down there, fruits, vegetables of gigantic proportions, and the children of the sun feed them with these fruits and vegetables. They said when the British explorers came to take their gold and diamonds and all that, they tried to stop them from going into these entrances, but they couldn't. They went in and they never came out. This reminds me of Cusco, which the children of the sun are there as well. The Incas' gold. People kept going into the underground tunnels and caves to find the gold and never came back, to the point where they had to seal them up. And where else do we find the children of the sun? In Tiwanaku. That's the one with the sunstone calendar that dates back 24,000 years. The other structure that is meant to align with the summer and winter solstice that would only have aligned 17,000 years ago. And the ones that told us the time where there was no moon. Now, there's been some amazing discoveries there with the sonar scanning stuff, sonar radar. They found a pre-Hispanic citadel. They found a pyramid underneath the ground. They found a palace so great they think it's going to take 50 years to excavate it. Anomalies that they think are megalithic structures. They already have 5 years of excavating lined up with the government, so this is not getting repressed. A U.S. Navy life vest belonging to Sam Vlasky went all the way from the Indian Ocean all the way to the middle of Russia. This is when they discovered that there was a whole system under the ground of caves, lava tubes connecting under the ocean, connecting the Earth's continents. And yeah, these lava tubes, they go under the ocean, and this explains a lot of the extraterrestrial activity from the deep ocean and why they come out of the ocean. I've been running into this stuff since the beginning of researching this, but a lot of it's just like, Marines' words, and just had a lot of other stuff. But this makes sense. There's parts of the ocean, I mean, obviously we all know that are just deep oceans inhabitable to us, but there's parts that are so inhabitable that a submarine will bounce off the water. The Marble Cave extends 6,500 feet and is 200 feet deep into the ground, and then it leads up to the center of a big mountain. And now Petra Massif is another mountain range in Russia, and it goes all the way from Crimea to the Caucasus Mountains, about 200 feet. And this was discovered by ufologists under mysterious circumstances, and then they started getting all top secret and wouldn't tell the public anything. I imagine ufologists with the government. And Metaveska Ridge, it has an endless system of tunnels, and it's a UFO hotspot. These tunnels, just that they've mapped, go tens of kilometers, and they are 70 feet to 100 feet circumference, diameter. And the highest peak is 400 feet into a mountain. Common denominator between all these points are mountains that these go into. Remember, Patrick H. Price saw the extraterrestrial base inside the mountain. These mountains are hollowed out. Kind of insane. And there's a place called the Gorge. It is 400 feet deep. It's only 5 feet around, lacquered with some kind of chemicals that cannot be reproduced by scientists, and it is indestructible and radioactive. And the fact that it's just 5 feet around shows that it's for the little ant people, whatever you want to call them. And these tunnels in Russia go all the way to Japan. I googled ancient tunnels underneath Japan, and there's a whole nother system there. This Earth is just a whole system of ancient tunnels underneath our feet. In 1904, J.C. Brown was hiking Mount Shasta looking for places to mine. He worked for a mining company, and he comes across a cave that's all covered with rocks and rubble, so he moves it all, goes inside, hikes 11 miles, and there's all these rooms and chambers, and he calls one a worship room with statues that glow in the dark, which is interesting because Mount Shasta has had reports of glowing coming from the top and the bottom of Mount Shasta, sunrise and sunset. It was even reported in the Shasta newspaper. And there was mining equipment, shields, weapons, gold, gold, gold. And then the final room was a burial chamber with 25 skeletons, 7 to 10 feet tall, wrapped in ornamental robes, kind of like mummified. This reminds me a lot of the G.E. Kincaid situation. Oh yeah, there was also tablets with hieroglyphs on them, like really replica of it. And there was an 8-foot skeleton found nearby also. But back to J.C. Brown, 30 years later, he gets 80 people, researchers, scientists, all rounded up to go search this cave. The Shasta newspaper is reporting on it. Guess what? He never shows up, disappears, never to be heard again. Canceled, nobody ever entered the cave. And there are volcanic tubes beneath our Earth's surface. They're huge, and they can go dozens of kilometers. So if you can imagine, biggest opening is Pluto's cave, most famously haunted. So much that they think Mount Shasta, that there's a secret alien base, all kinds of rumors that it's a Lemurian base, all this stuff. But there's been a lot of sightings and reportings of, luminescent beings like disappearing into the caves, which is funny because the shining ones is what the Tue de Anu were called, which is ancestor of the Anunnaki. And they say you can safely go inside the cave 1,200 feet. There's that number again. 12 portals, 12 families of the original Atlanteans, which is the Anunnaki. What happens when you get 1,200 feet into the cave? So there was this man, Anastasius Kircher, the man who knew everything, and he wanted to know what the inside of a volcano looked like. So they lowered him inside the volcano, and this is what he drew. In 1997, archaeologists at University of California went to Belize on expedition, where they discovered a giant cave. This chamber went into the earth endlessly. When they hit 3 miles, there was sacrifices to the gods. thousands of human sacrifices, and they just kept exploring, and it was just endless. And we've talked about Mount Shasta and Pluto's Cave. There's other lava tubes that extend all the way through California into Mexico. There's one all the way in Bishop, still California, Casa Diablo, and the walls are completely smooth, lined with hieroglyphs, and there's sounds coming from underneath the ground, as if operational. Mysterious little lights coming from the walls, letting in light. And there's NTS, Nevada testing site in Nevada. It's an underground testing site. Well, they did 1,000 nuclear tests. Of that, 971 were underground. Because of these tests, 2,000 kilometers away in Canada, at their military site, their radiation levels were 20 times normal. Like, oh, well, it's because it's right by this cave that's part of the continent's interconnecting vast system of caves and tunnels. Well, this led archaeologist James Mackin to do an expedition on the cave. Hundreds of meters in, he comes to an overwhelming smell of sulfur, lots of human skeletons, and operational noises coming from below the ground. Now, remember, Phil Schneider, he said that all of these underground bases, extraterrestrial / government, they all connect by these, floating magnetic silver trains that go through these lava tubes. And speaking of sulfur, I came across this terrible smell with Phil Schneider, Myrna Hansen. I've run across it so many times. I just ran across it in another video I want to show you because it's kind of hilarious. It's Alaska government tunnel that is so old that they're letting somebody do like a science tour of it for permafrost.
Oh yeah, we're gonna smell them. Smell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is stinky.
It's a little bit like manure.
As I was unpacking, and the wool long underwear that you have to wear in Alaskan winters still reeked like the tunnel.
In 1990, the Bulgarian government spent the equivalent of $20 million to excavate something called Object Number 1 in a project called Project Sunbeam. And there's a little town called Tsarichina up in the mountains. Truckloads of military men just storm through, show up, fence off an area, and start digging. No explanation. They dug this hole for 2 years, draining all of their resources. The CIA, our CIA, was interested. We see in the Freedom of Information Act 2008, they requested from them information on this, which was granted. We just don't know what they got. When the project was over, like, everybody was forced to hand over all of their documentation, was silenced on the subject. Military officials, other key players, decided to unite and speak out. About 2 years after they closed the hole, they had a public conference where everybody just started telling what happened, and there was no contradictions. Everybody was telling the same story, different details. In 1990, right before this, there was 2 UFO sightings, one 20 miles from Tsarichina, both at military bases. One, there was a humanoid creature, and this was the 20-mile away from Tsarichina one, and a military aircraft captain took a 17-minute videotape and put in a formal report. Right after this, the Bulgarian government opened up a research team into paranormal investigation, and of course they had the normal scientists and all that, but they also hired a psychic. And honestly, like, nearly every government has done this, like Russia, China, Germany, US. We had Project Stargate, UK, like pretty much everybody. Dmitry Kekamanov was a psychic involved, and he said that he kept getting a retractor to this little village, Tsarichina, and that there was something below the ground. He thought it was treasure. He wasn't sure what it was at first. So they had a group meeting with all these other mediums, and they channeled a spirit that said it wasn't going to be any heirloom or treasure, that they were going to find something that was going to change the world and change the history of mankind as they knew it. The entity said what was down there was the first human being. Adam, but not the Adam of the Bible, a stellar Adam. And if you're new, the Sumerian tablets also tells of the garden called Eden. First man was named Aduma, which means Adam. Same storyline. They were slaves there. Our Bible even admits that Yahweh created Adam and Eve to keep and tend the garden, and that there was gates at the garden. And Aduma, or Adam, he died at 50,000 years old, a little over 50,000 years old. He was an Atlantean. He goes on to say that this being is of extraterrestrial origin, but with DNA similar to ours, and it's from who the human race was born from. So if this was true, that Adam, the Atlantean, was still down there, that means he would have to be preserved in the same way as Gilgamesh was. So 3 days later, they source a bunch of funding, and they all just hit this little town, not telling anybody what's going on. The main psychic on board, Elisaveta Longanova, She pretty much, she stayed loyal the longest, but she finally broke also when everybody else was, and she actually put it in a book, which not one person was able to dispute one thing. They all completely concurred with what she was saying. She would invoke automatic writing, which means a spirit would write through her, kind of like in the Rendlesham Forest incident, Mount Shasta. I've heard of this quite a few times. And it would tell her exactly where to dig. It also told her that this Adam was the son of Samuel, which is very interesting because Manly P. Hall said that Cain was the son of Samuel, spirit of the fire. So this would be an Anunnaki, a spirit that obviously would have made Adam. But then they also told her that this being would be hermaphroditic, giving them incentive that they obviously wanted, which was superior DNA to splice, probably create an army of these superior beings. Little fireballs would be hovering in threes in the sky, kind of also reminds me of Rendlesham Forest incident. Also, there was what they called a sunbeam that would shoot out from the sky, and it would move and direct them where to dig, and it actually had them dig a complete little spiral, like a spiral staircase. The entity through the psychic would tell them which kind of landmarks they're going to hit, and they always would. At one point they hit a barrier that was too hard to penetrate, just like we did, just like the Russians did. Kenov, one of the men who was involved, who actually wound up writing a book as well, argued that there was no way that this was natural. They were digging through rock the whole time. So it was definitely a phenomenon. No matter what the Earth's substance, it couldn't have created this. It was an artificial megalithic mass. Their machinery and tools just started malfunctioning or stopping altogether. So they brought in the Ministry of Defense with explosives. They exploded a few. It wasn't really working, but the entity said, keep going, don't worry, I'll guide you. We're going to do daily explosives in a certain pattern. And they did, but they wound up completely burning through their whole explosive budget, like their whole budget in general, till the men started digging with their hands with little tools. You have to ask why they wanted this so bad. So they decided to bring in Baba Vanga, Bulgarian's most famous psychic. They called her the Nostradamus of Bulgaria. She predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl disaster, the presidency of Barack Obama, death of JFK, death of Joseph Stalin, which actually she was arrested for. She was held for 6 months until he died in the exact way she said he was going to, and then they released her. This is what Baba Vanga said. She said, the aliens told me that the research has to stop. Don't dig. There's a center of the Earth that's at 2,000 kilometers. There's a dangerous crystal. It controls the movement of the Earth. It has to stay there as long as the Earth exists. Stop digging or the Earth will die. There will be many new plagues and diseases for humans. This is hell, but not the hell as you know it. There are people that live there just like us, but they're of different origin. There's also a space device sent by an extraterrestrial. There are astronauts down there. Thousands of years ago, your country didn't even exist. Another civilization from another planet sent 3 astronauts to Earth to investigate. They weren't human, they were robots. Which she says we're also going to turn into robots. Doesn't mean like artificial mental, like there's still consciousness. It's just a more advanced body opposed to our inferior decaying bodies. The more you dig, the more radiation you're going to emit. Stop digging, it's not your time. But then she did give credit to Longanova's predictions and confirmed that there was this being down there to her mistake. So of course they ignored everything she said and they just kept digging. If this isn't proof that all government, the United Nations, all knows about our hidden history, then what is? Like, there's no way they'd be digging for 2 years, spending their entire budget, if they didn't know the Atlanteans were real. When they finally broke through the last of the extremely hard rock, it opened up. There was some kind of arch, artificial structures, an ancient tunnel that was sealed off with all these boulders. They tried to dig out the boulders, but they were just really tightly bonded with some kind of seal. They ran into a long rectangular slab that the entity called a biological defense plate, ordered everybody not to touch it, but it had to be torn down, deconstructed in a certain manner, because there was a lot of bacteria that would just multiply on Earth very quickly if anything happened. So they gave it deconstructing instructions. There was many layers of it, and they destroyed it. This was the first of 3 of these defense plates that they ran into. They had to have chemical officers come disable them every time. They said it was a stopper to keep uninvited guests out and to protect from an energy barrier portal. They warned as they would proceed, they would hit a gas, but it wasn't toxic for them, only for intruders. Then all of a sudden, she gets a message saying that they're landing, that they're coming to the tunnel. And as soon as she gets this, the spaceship lands in a ravine. This is documented. They tell her, tell everybody go inside, close the curtains, like go into a tent, like you're not safe near us. Everybody does. They go into the tunnel, come back out. The dogs are sedated in a circle, all 9 of them. They say, okay, it's safe to come out. And the dogs weren't dying or anything. They even sent her a message being like, don't worry, the dogs are fine. And they went down to the tunnel and they found like part of the wall dug out. So then they invite Longanova to astral project tour their spacecraft, which she does, obviously. She said they looked a lot like us, larger with longer hair, like Atlanteans, obviously, and they had a sun emblem on their chests. She asked what it was, and they said the light in which they travel through space on, like portal to the sun. And that used to be a swastika, but the Nazis killed it for them. Actually, Admiral Richard Byrd, when he was sucked down into inner Earth in Antarctica, there were swastikas everywhere on their airplanes, like all over the place. They finally hit a hollow cavity. They pulled themselves into the entrance of the hole. Said everything was vivid colors. The primary color was pink, but there was pretty much every color involved. Orange, yellow, black, gray, brown, all of them. The eastern wall, there's a large triangular opening where they hit a long black arrow, like almost like painted on, that's a mile long. Seems very suspicious to me. I think that's what they were down there doing, planting this body and painting the arrow to direct them there. So they follow it, they hit this body, said it was similar to a human but much taller, and it was lit up red. As soon as they find this body, the government shuts in and tells them that they have to stop digging. They said that the budget had gone too far, it exceeded, which this already happened long ago. They were digging for 2 years, and then all of a sudden they're like at the very end and it's gone too far and everybody has to exit and fill the hole up. Very suspicious. I think it was the Men in Black. If you don't know the Men in Black, Google Albert K. Bender. Obviously everybody involved was devastated. They had come this far, but they had no choice. And honestly, the money it took to fill up this hole with cement was more money that it would have taken like to dig another week or two, if they even needed to. Who knows what happened with the body, but it sounds like they closed in before they could do anything about it. The locals reported 26 different phenomenons, mostly UFOs, some humanoids, poltergeists. They were all also seeing these beams of light come down and the fireballs, so it was witnessed all around. It definitely really happened. In 1829, Olaf Jensen and his father sailed through a polar opening into the Earth's interior. They spent 2 years among a race of giants and then exited out the South Pole. This is all documented in a book called The Smoky God. German U-boat commander 209 Heinrich Brodo had reached the interior of the Earth in Germany through a vast network of chambers and tunnels. Sir Henry Francis Bartholomew, a wealthy entrepreneur, he organized an expedition in 1903 to inner Earth. He got a whole team of, geologists, biologists, trackers, a photographer. There was 14 men on his team. And they went deep into a cave and were never seen again. And this part is absolutely true. However, when you Google this, you get, somebody playing a hoax saying that they found the body like a while later with a photo album and all these photos to inner Earth that are obviously edited and photoshopped. But factually, this happened. There's mountain ranges called Valley of the Headless Men. In 1905, the McLeod brothers went searching for gold, probably the first mistake, and they disappeared, never to be seen again. About 3 years later, their brother was searching for them. He finally found them, decapitated. The Dene people, which are the Native Americans of the land, they told of the Naha, who were a group of giants, an ancient group of giants that were vicious. They would come down from the mountains and terrorize them, cannibalize and rape them. So another group of these cannibal rapist giants. The specifics, how they would, cook their food in the hot springs and stuff like that. And hot springs actually is something Atlantis was known for. And if you're new, the Atlanteans were never vicious to humans before this. Pretty much our entire lives, we were calling them gods. They were very helpful, teaching us. Just at some point, there was a decision to eliminate them, and at least some of them went cannibal rapist, or more were reproduced who were. The Dene also talk about the spirits of the land, usually dark spirits. And hunters and trappers, many, have talked about woolly mammoths or mastodons in the valley, which is kind of strange. That's the one animal of inner Earth that Admiral Richard Byrd described in his diary when he got sucked into inner Earth in Antarctica. Then 1917, Martin Jorgensen went missing, and he showed up also headless after he had called his family and said he had struck it rich. Mount Nyagani in Zimbabwe, and Africa's infamous for, having a lot of contact with these spirits. The locals will tell you that inside the mountain lies the souls of their dead ancestors. And this is just the underworld. Anytime there's an extraterrestrial base inside the mountain, inside the earth, that's how they keep people away. It's the underworld, dead souls. When you go here, you can't return and all that. And they'll tell you that the mountain is haunted by spirits, trickster spirits, that will push people off the mountain. People go hiking and disappear all the time there. They say a sudden fog will come on, electronics will stop working, all kinds of phenomenons. And this kind of stuff happens a lot in the triangles. Like, I think Skinwalker Ranch must have an extraterrestrial base under there. The Navajos are the ones that called them skinwalkers to begin with, before it was public knowledge. Also, compasses and navigators go haywire, even explode. The locals say if you see a colored snake or bars of gold, ignore it, like it's a trick. Also, people experience all of a sudden getting like super nauseous, headaches, disorientation, hearing things, and all kinds of phenomena. Mount Rushmore has a secret chamber built into it, and guess what it's called? The Hall of Records. If you're new, the Hall of Records is where the Atlanteans kept their secret knowledge. Every single president on that mountain is a Freemason. A Freemason built the whole thing and the secret chamber. You can see it looks like it's blocked off by a stone in this picture, and then they open it up and the stone is like lowering into the ground or something. It's like barely there. And everything is locked in a titanium vault. I'm sure there actually is secret hidden Atlantean knowledge there. 1987, Germany, Berg Mountain. 3 people found a secret chamber, which was said to be a portal. They disappeared for 3 months. Nobody heard from them. Then they showed up in a boat in the Red Sea. Somebody didn't want them there. Just like, beam, bye-bye. They ended up calling their family, having no clue where they were, how they got there. And then, of course, this got the attention of Hitler, and he took a little trip there. There's a book called Agartha, The End of the Earth, which is a scientific account of inner Earth. It was published in 1895. Technically, the author is John Lloyd, but the book starts out saying the manuscript was delivered by I Am the Man Who Did It. 30 years earlier, I Am the Man was in a clandestine elite secret society that he was actually undercover trying to expose. And all of a sudden he gets kidnapped by a group of men in hoods, and he's taken to a cave in Kentucky, where he's met with a reptilian with no eyes, but reptilians do have eyes. I'm not sure what's up with this, maybe just for effect. And he's just dripping with moisture, and he takes him inside the cave. Nearly the whole book is just the science and the physics of the interior of the Earth. And it was actually published as nonfiction when it was first released. And he had a lot of respect from the scientific community. He got many letters from scientists, physicists, geologists with interest. There's entire sections of the books about the geological phenomenon, chemical reactions, energy, light, matter, gravity. He met with an extremely gorgeous woman who introduced herself as Agartha, Aphrodite, who was Isis, and it was really her. There was giant fungi all around. He ate from one. He hallucinated freezing and burning to death at the same time. And then he saw heaven at the center of the earth. As time is standing still, he realizes just how severely flawed man's science is, and that science and religion are the same, and all the ancient secrets of the universe are held by only the very few elite. At this point, he transforms into an immortal to fulfill his purpose given to him by his abductors. But not immortal in man's form. It says, expect to face annihilation and destruction in mortal form, and to exist between life and death. Also describes him as an old man. He wasn't when he went in. They put liquid all over him, and he transformed into this old man with a beard, which I run across these old men with beards that are immortal like all the time, all the way back from the Sumerian tablets. The original Noah was an immortal man, old man with a beard. I'm the Man Who Did It first manifested in Llewellyn Drury's house, who was an occultist, and he told him, wait 30 years and then publish this. So he took it to, the most established, well-known author that he knew, which was John Lloyd, and then he took it on as author, letting everybody know I'm not the author. 7 chapters of this book is about the gravitational physics, including that him and this reptilian jump off a steep crevice, and because of the weightlessness, they're able to ascend and land just fine, which this completely aligns with the Bucegi, the Amazonian tribe. They're the guarders of these caves that go deep down into inner earth, and they have been for thousands of years, and they'll tell us this currently. And when they would go down there, after about 7 days of hiking down, they would become weightless, and things would even start to float. I Am the Man Who Did It said that he was instructed to join this elite secret society, work his way all the way up, and then expose them. And he did. He worked his way to the top, and then he wrote a manuscript, and then the publishing house burnt to the ground. He was arrested for accidental $2 debt, and then from his jail cell, he was abducted and never saw again. I'm the Man Who Did It left enough details and clues about his old life to figure out who he was. He was a real man. He was William Morgan. Everything fit to a T. He worked his way up into Freemasonry all the way to 3rd degree. That's the highest. Then he wrote an expose called Illustrations of Masonry, which was to expose their secrets. Right before it could go to print, the publishing house was mysteriously set on fire. He forgot to pay a $2 bill in a bar, which obviously he was just drunk. He was a Freemason. He had money. And they arrested him. He was abducted from his jail cell by a bunch of men in robes, hooded robes, that rode off in horse and carriage. He was never seen again. I'm the Man left the exact date this happened, which was the exact date this happened to William Morris. There's also another detail that he said in the carriage there was a dead body, a corpse that looked like him somewhat, and that they dumped it in the ocean. And then a year later, a bloated corpse washes up, which they write off as him, but it wasn't even in anything that he had worn ever. So you have to ask yourself why only 130 years ago a book like this was taken so seriously. Or, I mean, thousands of years before, why something like the Bible with all these stories of these entities was taken so seriously. Thousands of years before that, this quote-unquote mythology, where I guess just from the beginning of our recorded history, everybody was living in delusion and liked to make up stories. Why people, brilliant men like Isaac Newton, Edmund Halley, Herodotus, Pythagoras, and so many more believed in these entities and in our earth. And this is a rhetorical question. What's the uncommon denominator? It's the gaslighting. It's the government media control and the bubble that we've been put in today. 2013, South Africa, a couple of cave explorers found the Rising Star Cave System. And deep, deep, deep into the earth, they found a new species called Homo naledi. Now, the thing is, the whole entrance to this cave system, there's a whole network of kilometers of caves. The whole entrance is artificial. It was carved out by miners. So there was no way to get into this cave system from Earth before they did this. From outer Earth, anyways. So this cave system, to even get to the first huge chamber, you had to crawl through tiny little crawl spaces, very difficult to get to. Then you had a big chamber called the Dragon's Chamber. They weren't even there. Then you go up the cave, have to climb up, and then you hit a 12-meter drop, 40 feet. And this little chute is only a half a foot. It's 18 centimeters. It's only a half a foot width. And they're trying to say that the Homo naledi carried all their dead ones through this whole Earth system to drop them down that chute, which is impossible. They were 5 feet tall, like any other 5 foot tall person around. They're more than a half a foot wide. So they'd have to teleport them down magically. Not to mention, there wasn't a pile of bodies under the chute. The bodies were spread all throughout the cave. There was a burial. So this is just another story they came up with, as they always spin stories to explain this stuff. And honestly, if I'm laughing out loud at the absurdities while watching a documentary for the first time, you don't think a huge group of people came up with some flaws in this? And of course, they're trying to put the evolution spin on it like they do every time, making claims that would be impossible to know. Their noses were really flat like monkeys. How would you know that based off the skeleton? There's no way. They specifically brought in evolutionary anthropologists to explain this through evolution, just like they did with the Denisovans. And the Denisovans are giants with skulls twice our size. So these are the 16-foot giants. Same thing, try to paint them out as monkeys, apes, primates. Same with the Neanderthals. Every species they find, or any giant they want to explain, they were, it's part of evolutionary. They look like apes, which is just not the case. The Denisovans and the Neanderthals were the giants. They're just the different proportion ones. And really, so what is it? These little Homo naledi were 5 feet tall. The Denisovans, I would guess, 15, 16 feet tall. The Neanderthals had to be, 10, 12 feet tall. So which part of the evolution did we come from? Smaller primates? Or did we somehow come from larger primates? It can't be both. So which is it? So the good news is that you're not a primate. I mean, you're from extraterrestrial origins, so, perception, whether that's good or bad, I think it's good. But yeah, if you're questioning, well, how come, when I do a Google search, all I get is evolution, because that's government media control, Ministry of Communications, MCI runs the media. All your textbooks, like the whole educational system, is government. It's all produced that way for a reason. They're estimating them to be 236 to 335,000 years old. So that's more than 100,000 year difference. So they obviously have no clue how old they are, but they are obviously very ancient. If they're even admitting they're that old, they're probably older. If you don't know what Agartha is, every single ancient culture will tell you about it. It's the inner earth that these extraterrestrials inhabit. The most commonly known are the Buddhist Tibetan monks, call it Shambhala. The Mayans call it Xibalba, and there's like tons of evidence of Xibalba. We found all these caves with Mayans and giants and all that in it. And Sumerians call it Kur, which they describe it as the space between the Earth's crust and the primeval sea, which would be the sea and Earth. We just found subterranean oceans and mountains and a layer in the Earth that's 400 miles deep into the Earth. In Japan, they call it Yomi. They say there's two entrances. One is where the seas plunge into inner Earth, and the other is a big hole blocked with a boulder. In China, it's Daiyu, and they describe it as a subterranean layer of mazes and chambers, which is like similar to what we've actually found in Egypt. In Egypt, they call it Metropolis, and it's actually been visited by men like Herodotus and Strabo and described to us. In Babylonia, it's Arkala. In India, it's Patala, described as the land of crystal lakes and rolling green hills. And Patala means the earth below the feet. And in Death Valley, the Paiute, call it Shana'ab, and a lot of these will tell you about the entities that come out. Every Native American culture will tell you this. The Navajo, the Hopi. The Hopi will specifically tell you about the reptilians and the little greys, they're dropas, they call them the ant people, that brought them into inner earth before the pole shift. Black Mountain in Australia, which is actually two mountains, made up completely of black granite boulders. And remember the power that granite harnesses, like quartz. It's made out of quartz. It was one of the two stones used in the Russian pyramids. These mountains are just boulders piled upon boulders, like a maze of gaps and caves and crevices that people go missing into. It's actually referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of Australia's far north. There's been a lot of official reports of people disappearing since the 1800s. Talked about the Aboriginals of Australia, very spiritually enlightened group of people. They talk about this mountain. I'm not going to try to pronounce what they call it, I'll butcher it. But they say that it's an artificial structure, that it's not natural, that some deities created it, which in my opinion, I would agree, because there's no other mountain like it. Under the Bucegi Mountains in Romania, an ancient civilization was found. There was a large hollow dome connecting to an ancient winding tunnel. This was discovered in 2003, yet no further investigation has been done. The natives say that their god Zamolsis had built it and filled it with sacred knowledge. And the Sphinx on the top is guarder of this sacred knowledge, like another hall of records. Now you can see this Sphinx does not look like a Sphinx anymore. Like several pole shifts, this thing has survived. The Andean highlands of Colombia, also known as the Andes, which I've mentioned a few times. The Andes are one of these inner earth mountain ranges. There's a mountain called Peña de Huaca. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it is 9,000 feet above sea level. And the Muisca people, they say that the peak is the gateway of the gods. The natives use the mountain to worship the moon goddess Chia, which was very likely Isis, if not goddess Aradia. There are lights, white, red, blue, seen flying above and into this mountain and have continuously been reported for the last 400 years, also talked about by the Muisca people. And the governor says that the locals believe that this is some kind of airport for these flying discs. Like most of these inner earth mountains, highly magnetized, and phenomenon reported like compasses not working, electronics malfunctioning, and even losing time. If you recall my segment on the Bucegi Mountain, the Bucegi Sphinx, that protects the ancient library of sacred information, aka Atlantean Hall of Records. Well, another one, there's several. In 2002, one of the Pentagon geostationary satellites using bionic waveform technology discovered a huge cavity inside this mountain. Connecting to this cavity was a zigzag tunnel for energy flow, kind of like we see in the Great Pyramid. The tunnels were clearly man-made, flat, straight stone, and then they led to a big dome in the center of the mountain, and nearly an identical structure was found in Baghdad, Iraq, actually right before the war broke out and America invaded Iraq. This inner earth structure had no connection to the outside world. There was no tunnels from the outside of the mountain leading in. It was all enclosed. So American diplomats receive word that Romania is going to do a press release announcing this a very important discovery, life-changing discovery, and of course they immediately oppose it, saying that it'll turn our economies and possibly the whole world into chaos. America came to the Vatican for intervention, and surprisingly the Pope didn't oppose it. He just said, you know, weigh the pros and the cons, and then actually even offered like secret documents from the archive to Romania. In the end, Romania, under strong American influence, decided to postpone the disclosure and, you know, reveal it in a gradual manner in the future, which is what they're doing right now. This is slow disclosure. He established diplomatic connections in Romania on this trip, and he was able to set up a research facility dedicated to the mathematics of time travel. Upon his return, he visited Nicholas Preston and Peter Moon. They're the authors of Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. And no, it's not actually fiction, only classified as it. So Dr. Anderson connects Peter Moon to a Romanian publisher and to a member of the Roman Intelligence Services Occult Department. The purpose was to collaborate on the discoveries of this inner Earth mountain, which was said to be the most significant archaeological discovery ever. This was a mysterious holographic hall of records. Sound familiar? It's what Guy Ballard described inside Mount Shasta and the Himalayan mountains of Shambhala. The holographic library was enclosed in an energy shield that was smaller than the actual dome. The projection hall was in a circular shape, and then there was 3 tunnels connecting. Of these 3 tunnels, one was straight ahead, and the other 2 were symmetrically on each side of it, and they were lit up with a greenish hue. There was a row of huge stone tables in the shape of a T. None of the tables were less than 2 meters high. And then there was very fine, shiny wire that came from the tables and hung down into a silver rectangular box. And there was little pulses of light that were shooting up these little fine wires. The name projection hall was given by the research team because just walking by these tables, you don't have to touch anything, it would activate this projection of a holographic image. At the center of the table were slits, and the projections would come out there. They were large, like almost 2.5 meters high. And it was everything from like physics to astronomy, cosmology, technology, architecture. Of course, it revealed different intelligent races. If you remember the Guy Ballard one, the reptilian race and the Atlanteans were revealed to him through these projections. They displayed the field of religion, the creation of humans, the falsity of Darwin's theory of evolution, the crucifixion of Jesus and the many that came to see him be crucified that were not from that time. Also spiritual missions of divine figures from 18,000 to 20,000 years ago. That 90% of our history is falsified and that the truth lies in mythology. The research team said it was like a library of the universe, and its builders were unknown, only that they were very tall, Atlanteans. There were stone tablets with an unknown hieroglyph, and they illuminated with a phosphorescent glow. These hieroglyphs are symbols, unknown. It was documented that there was a lot of circles and triangles involved, which you see these on UFOs. The Kozarov mirror study, that came up a lot. If you haven't looked into the Kozarov mirror study, I have a video on it. You can just search it with my name and TikTok. It's pretty interesting stuff. There was a dome container that radiated blue, and inside was a fine white powder, and the American research team analyzed it, said it was an unknown crystalline form of monatomic gold to a purity extent that we haven't been able to produce. But even on the levels we have produced, we've observed incredible regenerative tissue capacity, aka staying young for a long time, like the Atlanteans. This substance is not only present in alchemical texts, of course, it's in ancient Mesopotamian text, Shamana, and ancient Egyptian text, motherfuckers, I'm pretty sure that's pronounced, and of course NASA took great interest in it. In its pure form, the powder stimulates certain energy flows and exchanges of cellular and neurological levels. That it causes a very accelerated rejuvenation process. And they told Dr. Anderson that somebody can live thousands and thousands of years if it's taken in a certain quantity at certain intervals. So this is the Philosopher's Stone, which the Count of Saint Germain, who was a real-life mortal, I have a video on that too, he's actually the one that showed Guy Ballard this holographic library in Mount Shasta. So these 3 tunnels, they run thousands of kilometers into the earth, going through to different parts of the earth. The one on the left went to Egypt, to a secret undiscovered complex that lies under the sand between the Sphinx and the pyramid. The one on the right, of course, led to the Himalayan mountains, Shambhala, the kingdom of Agartha. And then the middle one branched off and led to Baghdad, the identical structure in Iraq, and then the Gobi Mountains in Mongolia. There was a lot of other cool technology that I couldn't even cover and found only in this 15-minute video, which you could watch. You could also, if you're a reader, read the book Transylvania Sunrise for the full story.